Being an educator is one heck of a lonely journey, but every step holds a story, an experience that shapes how we teach, learn, and grow. Welcome to the Educator Experience. I'm your host, Salli Carter, and together we'll explore the moments that define us as educators. Through authentic conversations and shared experiences, we're building a community that connects, reflects, and inspires, all while breaking down barriers in education, one story at a time. You are not alone. Let's grow together. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Educator Experience podcast. Today, we're exploring equity, diversity, and inclusion in our teaching practices. I'm your host, Salli Carter, and joining me today is Dr. Treena Orchard. Treena is an anthropologist, author, and activist in the School of Health Studies at Western University. For the last 25 years, she has conducted intensive research with people in sex work, Indigenous communities, individuals impacted by HIV and AIDS, and sexual minority groups. Amazing. She's an award-winning teacher and author of 3 books, one of which I have here, Sticky, Sexy, Sad, which kept me up all night last night. Just absolutely fascinated by it. 60 articles and book chapters and 80 conference presentations. Wow, Treena, thank you so much for joining today. I recently heard one of your podcasts on CBC Radio, which was very cool about this particular book. However, today we're talking about EDI, as I understand it's central to your teaching and research. So I was wondering if we could just start off by maybe explaining or inviting you to explain EDI, as some of our listeners may be new to this framework and the principles. And then we can progress into what your experience was like as a feminist researcher, integrating these practices, and then some of the challenges.
Great. Sure. No, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for inviting me to be here. And I think these issues are important in the university and in general society. So it's really good to talk about them. And so equity, diversity, and inclusion sort of emerged out of the social justice framework. Depending on where you are in the world, civil rights is sometimes cited as the beginning of broader political considerations about race, equity, gender, the different structural factors that can disadvantage certain populations compared to the mainstream populations in various settings, including education. And equity, diversity, and inclusion became really a buzzword, and it became part of our practice. Some of us were embracing principles of equity, diversity, cultural relevancy, cultural safety, much earlier than it became an institutional norm. But it's about being attentive to issues of difference and how they can impact different communities, whether it's negatively and different ways we can think about kind of leveling the playing field. So for the university setting, for instance, we often have now targeted calls for hiring, whether it's staff or faculty members who are from different equity deserving groups. So that's people living with disabilities, women, and often racialized populations, as a way to make sure that the people teaching our students, who are very diverse, are also diverse themselves.
And then how has this impacted you as a professor? And what are some of the challenges that you've experienced?
Well, it's been an interesting process to observe as someone who has been an equity researcher for a very long time. It became part of policy documents. It became what everybody was talking about. At the beginning, there was quite a lot of pushback from certain people in the university because they felt like these considerations and changes in the rules were sort of thrust upon them without much consideration.
To roll out?
Yeah, it was, before the pandemic. So we're thinking like 2017, 2018. And they often sort of correlate with movements to indigenize the campus as well. So taking indigeneity as a serious principle and wanting to expand resources teaching services, teaching faculty, open it up for more students who identify as Indigenous. So these things sort of were happening at around the same time. And there was some pushback from certain individuals who might represent, you could say, the mainstream heterosexual male white norm. And so that was not surprising, but quite frustrating when thinking about the need for these changes, which have been a long time coming. And it's a natural outcome, I guess, of shaking the tree and shifting norms. There's going to be resistance to it from certain sectors who benefit from doing things the way they've always been done. But I really began to want to take a leading role, at least in the School of Health Studies. And so I developed, again, during the Black Lives Matter movement, an anti-racism task force to begin looking at ways of not just talking about it, but making it part of our curriculum, making it part of our normal way of doing things so that it's not seen as, oh, just an add-on. Oh, we have to remember equity. Oh, it should be part of the normal way, the new normal of doing university in terms of policy, teaching, different considerations for different student populations, and that kind of thing.
So, what are some actual succinct strategies that perhaps new educators could introduce into their classrooms or to their practice?
Well, I think some of the things that new educators could do before even getting to the classroom is to have these discussions about, so how do we do EDI in our house? Because it's not across the board the same. The way the hard sciences approach it, probably a little bit different than those of us in the social sciences or even the health sciences. So I think it's sort of getting a read of the room by, faculty and department and school, wherever you happen to be located, and get a sense of what is the culture here? How are my colleagues responding to this? What kinds of resources do we have at our disposal to make it so that we don't have to recreate the wheel every time we want to try and do something, So having a sense of how things have been done in your local space, also being aware of the different resources. There's a lot of resources online. It can be kind of overwhelming, but most universities and schools have someone, whether it's teaching and learning center, who are probably pretty well adept at accessing some of the resources that have come across their desk as being particularly helpful and useful. So those are some preliminary things. And then it's also a reflection of, what kind of scholar are you? What kind of teacher are you? What kind of gaps do you might want to address in your teaching? Not just in terms of content, but also how you do it. Do you provide choice in your assignments? Do you have a combination of written as well as multiple choice, the sort of things we're required to do often in larger classes? But also, do you include in your resource list academics and other writers who are not white men? That's another very important way of doing good equity, diversity, and inclusion work.
What I'm hearing from you as well, or what's coming up for me, is it's an opportunity for us to get to know our students or our learners as well, their backgrounds, and potentially incorporate aspects of various cultures, but really actually trying to connect and get to know people who are sitting in front of us or sitting among us, kind of thing.
Yeah, our students are really diverse. London, when I moved here, people were like, oh, it's Pleasantville. It's a really white city. And I was like, well, it really wasn't, even when I moved here. I mean, it's become much more diverse, but our students have always been very, very diverse and mixed. And it's incumbent upon us to incorporate principles and ideas and discussions that are inclusive to make their education experience meaningful.
And so, what are some of the challenges you experience as a professor in your classroom?
Well, I don't know if I've experienced a lot of challenges in my classroom per se, because it's really how I've always done things. So while I have a new statement on my syllabus about equity, diversity, and inclusion, I didn't really have any kind of challenges, because it's like I said, it's just, I'm always, as an anthropologist, taking multiple perspectives into consideration. I often, provide choice in terms of assignments. And I also have no problem like putting the official lecture on hold and unpacking certain issues as they come up. And, sometimes it's about taking a risk and asking questions that you think students care about, but they might be a little bit scared to talk about. So that can be a challenge. But yeah, I would say that in general, it's been a relatively smooth transition for me. I know that for some of my other colleagues who were a bit newer to this space, they had different kinds of challenges. But I think, despite some of the initial challenges, they really see the benefits and they hear the benefits from the students, not just in the formal evaluations, but in the quality of the discussions. And also, a lot of our students are very political. They might not think of themselves as political, but they're engaged in advocacy, whether it's, on their phone or it's taking part in different kinds of marches. They're a really professional, really engaged group of people. And so, if they're not too young to be engaged in these conversations with us as their professors.
Interesting. And then, so I'm curious to hear what your perspective is as to the change. So, having witnessed the implementation a number of years ago to now, how is that going? And where do you think what's next?
Yeah, I think, in some ways it's been a really positive, slow change, but culture change takes a long time. And so one of the things that I was long advocating for at our university was not just a committee about equity, diversity, and inclusion. We need permanent, full-time qualified staff. We need an office of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we do have one. And we have very skilled individuals. And, that office is growing every year as they see the benefits and just the cascade of ways in which we can incorporate EDI in so many different levels. So in terms of what's next, I think the task is really to keep the conversations going and to remind ourselves that this is not just a quick fix Band-Aid. Okay, now we have the office. Now we don't have to think about that anymore. We've done that.
Right? Here's a policy. Check. It's a box checked, and that's all, right?
So we need to act on the ebbs and flows. Like some people, they don't talk about it as much as they used to. Does it mean that they're doing it in their classrooms? Not necessarily. It might just mean that it's kind of died down because it's not such a buzzword, and so those, it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. And that is how change works, a few steps forward and then a bit of a panacea or a resting period. But I think the challenge is really to make sure that it's always on our radar.
And a continued conversation. I appreciate that. So, Treena, as we start to wind down this conversation, what are some final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I would say that when thinking about ways to do equity, diversity, inclusion, and that can also include indigenization, it's be creative. Don't just, use the boilerplate language that the university or the educational institution has plunked out for us on the website. Think about it to the degree that you can, because they have great ideas that we'll never think of. And, sometimes our well-meaning intentions can backfire. And so if we try and do this quickly just to meet a certain mandate or something, we could risk being potentially seen as offensive or really out of touch. And so engaging with our students in the creation or co-creation of different resources or ways to mobilize, the assignments that you're doing, that's really fun. And it also signals a genuine commitment on the part of your students.
I appreciate that. The idea of being honest and authentic with our students, that we are learning as well and growing as well as educators and co-creating as we go and asking for input along, right? Well, Treena, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insight on the importance of EDI and how we as educators can even better or incorporate its principles into our practices. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Don't forget to join our Facebook group, Educator Experiences Community, where we connect, collaborate, and support each other on our educator journeys. See everyone next week. Thank Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Educator Experience. We hope you're walking away feeling connected, inspired, and just a little bit more supported on your journey. Ready to go a little bit deeper? Join the Educator Experience's community and check out our courses and workshops specifically designed to support new educators as they navigate the ups, downs, and everything in between. You'll find it all at educatorexperiences.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, share it with a fellow educator and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Together, we're building a vibrant community rooted in support and connection. See y'all next Monday.